Hi, everyone. Suzanne Barnhurst back here again with part 2 of week 3 lectures. And in this section, we're going to cover chapters 9 and 11 with a brief look at 9 and maybe a brief look at 12. So chapter 9 is in regards to basic elements of individuals and behavior in organizations, which is a significant component of a manager's job. How you communicate with people and how you manage people or handle the workload and people's personalities is a tough part of a manager's job. The first management job I ever had, I only had 3 employees and I felt like I was raising my teenagers again. So it was a tough, it was a challenge, but I learned a lot. And then from there, it became easier. So we're going to start with chapter 9. I'm going to look a little bit at the management in action piece where they talked about Burt's Bees. But specifically what I want to read to you is what Hunter Lovin said, who is the president of Natural Capital Solutions, is a nonprofit specializing in environmental practices and economic sustainability. She has a good perspective on employees. And she says that taking care of your workforce, particularly by engaging them and implementing a corporate commitment to sustainability, that's her thing, will drive greater productivity and greater profitability. She starts from the premise that satisfied employees are more productive employees, citing reports that unsatisfactory workers currently cost the U.S. economy $300 billion per year. That's an awful lot of money that could be saved if people can identify the reasons employees are unsatisfied. She then proceeds to argue that most satisfied employees are those who are given the opportunity to make progress in meaningful work. So not everyone is looking for the top dollar. They're looking for work that means something to them. So if they go to work for an organization that doesn't mean anything to them, where they don't really fit, then they're not going to be happy. So that, to me, indicates a lot of reasons for doing better, having better hiring practices in regards to identifying people that are fit for your company and helping individuals identify their own personality traits and how they interact with people, because that'll help you and them find the right fit for them. We sometimes use the term, I need help so bad I'm ready to hire people off the street. Well, that won't do you any good if they don't fit. And fit's very important these days. And so is sustainability. So she makes a good point there that many people would prefer to work for a company that practice environmental sustainability, community sustainability, anything that has to do with that topic. They are more prone to buy things from them, and obviously and some people to work for them also. Okay, so starting in chapter 9, we're just going to go briefly a couple of things. The first is understanding individuals and organizations, the psychological contract. It's an overall set of expectations held by the individual with respect to what he or she will contribute to the organization and what the organization will provide in return. So somewhere in our head, we've decided this is what I can contribute. These are my skills and abilities. This is about how much I think I should be paid for that. And this is what I expect you, the organization, to provide for me in return. Just as you expect something from me as an instructor, what I expect, you expect a certain level of education, and then I expect a certain level of response from that. Same idea. Individual contributions, as far as this contract are concerned, are things like effort, skills, ability, time, and loyalty. Organizational inducements include pay, benefits, time off, job security, recognition, those kinds of things. The company must be sure that the contributions and the inducements are balanced. That is, that they're getting the right value from the employee and the employee is getting the right value and they're offering the appropriate inducements then. Obviously, if that doesn't happen, then there's going to be unhappiness somewhere, probably on both sides, but that's just the beginning. The person job fit is the extent to which the person's contributions made by the individual match the inducements offered by the organization. So an absolute precise level is rarely something that can be achieved unless there's a lot of management discussion with people and the opportunity for training when there's areas that are lacking as far as the employee is concerned, or maybe it's organization selection procedures aren't perfect, and sometimes in addition to that, people change and organizations change. So when that happens, then sometimes there's unhappiness. Like we just talked earlier about in the innovation area, people are not always going to be happy. So it's something that needs to be worked on all the time. Everybody's a unique individual, and sometimes an accurate assessment isn't always possible. There are individual differences, and they are personal attributes that are different from one person to another. Obviously, that results in different behavior among individuals. And when these things occur, in order to understand them and assess them, then organizations must be sure that they are understanding the context, the situation, and each in which the behavior occurs. So if you have a problem because of people's individual differences, they need to be resolved, but they need to be understood first. So as a manager, this is the toughest part of your job from my perspective. Under the manager's checklist, it says that you should appreciate the importance of the person job fit, and that you must always remember that no two people are the same. And we need to remember that in everything that we do, but particularly in the job, that's important. The text then goes on to discuss things like the big 5 personality traits that each one of us possesses. They talk about the Myers-Briggs framework, which is a test we can take to assess people's personality. We can take, and then they can see what type of personality we have and help to make things fit better. There are now many, many more types of tests and assessments that people can do before they are hired for a job that are all perfectly legal, but they help identify where your skills, interests, and contributions may fit with the company, and whether you are or you aren't a fit. And I think many times when HR people use those types of things, the person that's applying for the job probably feels relieved if they figure out that it isn't going to be a fit for them. Then they can make a mutual agreement that that place isn't going to work. So I think we're getting better and better at that, although it's a little bit tough right now with the way things went last year. But it's something that manager needs to know and understand. One thing that a manager also needs to know and understand is whether your own personality, whether you're a type A or type B, because you're going to respond to people differently. So you need to know that. Okay, so I want to go to page 255 here. Jump to page 255 and talk a little bit about creativity in organizations, and that in regards to personality, because we just talked about it in innovation. Creativity in organizations is the ability of an individual, not in organizations, to generate new ideas or conceive a new perspective on an existing idea. So not everyone is that creative. Some of us need a little helping along when it comes to creativity. Other people are just more creative than others, or sometimes we used to say more left-brained. Researchers have observed that many creative people were raised in environments in which creativity was nurtured. Someone encouraged them all the time, and they gave the example of Mozart, whose mother was a musician. They were all, a family of musicians, and she encouraged him all the time. And he was playing the piano when he was 5, and he apparently is one of the most respected composers because of the types of kinds of music that he composed. And they also mentioned Thomas Edison because his mother did the same thing. And that's why you and I are all sitting here with lights on, which is pretty interesting. Personal traits and creativity, traits from a creative people, shared most by creative people, are openness. They like complexity. They have high levels of energy and independence. They have strong self-confidence and a strong belief in the fact that they are creative. So when it comes to innovation, and you're looking for people that are going to be helpful in an innovation or to help you find new innovation, those are some of the folks you might need to be looking for. Those people who have that tendency to just be, who are creative and display it. Okay. Managers who enhance creativity in their organization can reap the benefits from groups of people who identify ideas that no one else has before that time been able to come up with. Very helpful for your innovation. And as a manager, you should always know whether or not creativity is valued in your organization and how it's fostered, especially if the organization wants continuous improvement and it hasn't achieved that. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover in that part in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is full of information about individual personalities. So I would encourage you to read that just for your own understanding and possibly for some future part of your management position. Okay, now we're going to move on to chapter 11, the nature of leadership. This is the management in action is about Steve Jobs and his new CEO, Tim Cook, and about how they work together and the difference between the two of them. And there's a book out about Steve Jobs that's pretty interesting if you've read it. I haven't seen anything about Tim Cook yet, but there are a lot of people that say Steve Jobs was a visionary and someone who was very focused on aesthetics. In other words, if you probably don't remember, but the first Apple computer actually was a round shaped computer, and they were different colors. They weren't black or gray like most computers. They were clear and blue and orange. I think there was a red one. So they were very artistic, but simple. And that was his thing. Everything had to be simple and everything had to look good. But they say that he was kind of tough to work under, that he violated every rule of management, and that he was not exactly a fun guy to work for. On the other hand, people admired him so much that the black turtleneck he wore and the same color, I think a pair of jeans, other people in the company started to wear the same thing because they admired him so much. Either that or they were saving money on clothes. I don't know which. Steve Jobs wasn't a consensus builder, but he was a dictator. He listened mainly to his own intuition, and he was a micromanager. But somehow he took Apple from where it was to where it is today, now with the help of Tim Cook. Tim Cook, when he became the head of Apple, he made several changes. He cut down what he considered to be political behavior in the top management. So he got rid of whatever I guess he felt was the issue. He worked to develop a calmer, more benign culture and emphasized transparency and improved teamwork. So apparently it's working for him because they continue to be successful. All right, so let's move on to what is the meaning of leadership. Leadership is a process and a property. As a process, leadership is the use of non-coercive force to shape a group or organization's goals, motivate that behavior to achieve those goals, and then help define group organizational culture. So it's a big job. It's a really big job. And that's the process of which a leader follows. Now, there are different types of leaders, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Leadership as a property is a set of characteristics attributed to individuals who are perceived to be leaders. Leaders who are people who can influence the behaviors without having to rely on force. So they're not a leader if they are, well, I guess you can say Steve Jobs, I guess it wasn't by force, but he was not very easy to get along with. And as a micromanager, sometimes you feel pressured to do exactly what he wants. So he maybe wasn't a great leader. I actually wrote down here, what is Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, are they excellent leaders or are they bullies? Which one are they? You know, and bullies can be successful also. But leadership usually occurs through the use of influence, not force. And anyone who, leaders are usually those who accept, or who are accepted by other people, by people who say, yes, you deserve the title of leader because you do a good job and you lead by influence. So big difference there. What's the difference between leadership and management? So if you go to page 304, you'll see that there's a chart there that shows the difference between different activities and what a manager does and what a leader does. And I think the most interesting one here is the second one, which says developing a human network for achieving the agenda. If it's a management person, their job is to organize and staff. Okay, their job is to find the staff and organize them so that they can get the job done. Structure for accomplishing plan requirements, staffing that structure with individuals delegating responsibility and authority for carrying out the plan, providing policies and procedures to guide people, and creating methods or systems to monitor. A leader, on the other hand, aligns people, communicating the direction of the human network for achieving the agenda, communicates the direction by words and deeds to everyone whose cooperation may be needed, to influence the creation of teams and coalitions that understand his vision and the strategies and accept their validity. So there's a much bigger and broader picture. He presents the big picture and the future. He presents the current picture, and then he talks about where he wants to see it now, he or she. And that's the difference between a manager and a leader. Manager implements, leader has the vision and has the influence, the vision and the influence. Okay, organizations need to have both effective managers and strong leaders if they're going to be successful. Without either, they won't be. Now, leadership and power. And that starts on the next page on 305. There are different types of power. Power is the ability to affect other people's behaviors. In organizations, there are different types of power. And actually, in more than organizations and everything, there's 5: legitimate, reward, coercive, referent, and expert. Legitimate power is something that's granted to you by the organization. If your title is vice president, then you have more power than staffing supervisor. Legitimate power is essentially the same as authority. So then you have the authority over the group of people you've been giving. Reward power is the power to give or withhold rewards like salary increases, benefits, promotions, praise, that sort of thing. I wrote down here gratitude, or informal reward power is gratitude, pats on the back, that sort of thing. Anyway, all right. Coercive power is the power to force compliance by means of psychological, emotional, and physical threat. We've seen a lot of lawsuits lately as far as that concerned, is whether women felt coerced or threatened into doing something they didn't want to do. So that's considered coercive power. It can include verbal and written reprimands, disciplinary layoffs, fines, demotion, and termination. And if someone feels that they are being coerced, it's an HR issue. It also provokes resentment and hostility. Clearly, it's understandable. Referent power is based on the identification, imitation, loyalty, or charisma. Followers react favorably because they identify something in that leader who may be like them in personality, background, and attitude. So there's something about that person that you feel a special bond with because you see that they have the same personality, background, attitudes that you do. So you give them power. It can be your parents. And then the last one is expert power. And expert power is usually because you view someone as an expert on the topic or the information. Many people have accrued expert power over the years because of their experience. So someone that you work with, you may see as more powerful because of their expertise in the job than other people on the job, maybe even the president of the company, because they don't know your job as well. So not always, the expert isn't always the leader of the company. Okay. The next thing that the text wants to go over, and this is about how we identify who's a leader, are the two generic approaches to leadership. The first one is leadership traits. The second one is leadership behaviors. And how do we unpack the answers to what the text calls the leadership puzzle? How do we identify those folks? Well, the first one is leadership traits. And this approach says that there may be a set of traits that exist that differentiate leaders from non-leaders. If they can be identified, then we could identify, if we could identify those traits, then we could have possible leaders take tests or have interviews that could give us pretty much an idea if they have those traits or not. When researchers first did this, they thought that some of the traits would be intelligence, assertiveness, above average height, good vocabulary, attractiveness, and self-confidence. So those were the things they thought would be part of the leadership package. The text told us that literally hundreds of studies were done on this topic to attempt to identify these traits, but they weren't able to, because for every set of leader that had one common trait, there was a long list of exceptions found. So they weren't able to use this as a way to identify leaders, looking at their traits. So then they moved on to leadership behaviors and decided that maybe if they could identify and investigate the behaviors of current leaders, what they do, then they might be able to determine how they behave differently, and which was to make them more effective. So they did two studies, Michigan studies and the Ohio State studies. And they used terms like job-centered leader behavior, employee-centered leader behavior, which makes sense. Employee-centered is someone that's more focused on the employees than the job. And then the Ohio State was initiating structure behavior and consideration behavior. Again, one focuses more on the person, the other one focuses more on the job and the process. What they found out was that didn't help them either. That didn't help them either because it was not consistent. The leadership grid, the third way, provides for a means to evaluate and train managers to move towards a particular type of leadership style. And that's on 310, that chart on 310, figure 11.1. And what the leadership grid showed us is that there are 5 different types of leadership, some of them extreme. For instance, country club management has high consideration for employees and low concern for production. So that's country club management. And then the other one is authority compliance, which has high concern for production and low concern for people. So we could probably put Steve Jobs somewhere. I'm sorry, the highest one is, no, yeah, that authority compliance was the Steve Jobs kind. But then the highest and the one that scores the most is team management, which is high for both, high concern for people and high concern for production. So this idea was to try to push managers towards those types of management and develop their own characteristics in that way. But the ideal style is 9.9, the one at the top right. But the leader behavior theories have played an important role in development of contemporary thinking about leadership. What they eventually conclude is they urge us, don't be preoccupied with who leaders are, like the traits, but look more on what they do, in other words, their behavior. And I believe that the leaders who focus more on the people and identify the right people for the right time in the right place and provide the right reward are the ones that do better, and also are more focused on those folks. And if they do it that way, they will be more focused on the people aspect. Just as a courtesy to as a human being. So the last paragraph that I highlighted here that I thought was appropriate for this is that unfortunately, these theories make universal generic prescriptions about what constitutes effective leadership. And we are dealing with complex social systems because there's complex individuals. Few relationships are predictable. No formulas for success are infallible. Things can go wrong. So behavior theorists often fail when trying to find any kind of dependent prescription for effective leadership. So then they started to look at something different. And the next one is situational approaches to leadership, which are to identify key situational factors in and help you determine which way you would behave. So for each situation, you may be a different type of leader. And as they start on page 311, and I wrote down here what something I wanted to emphasize was that no one set of leadership behaviors is going to be universally effective. So depending on the situation, you may need to change your management behavior to a different type. And they suggest these different leadership behaviors, which include the LPC theory, the Room's decision tree, the path goal theory, and I believe that's the last one. Leader member exchange approach. And I'll allow you to read those yourself because they're kind of convoluted. And they're good to understand, but these are not things that you're going to sit down as a leader and say, okay, I'm going to memorize the steps to each one of these leadership situational approaches. You're going to do it with experience and intuition. But having it in your mind as options is probably a helpful thing. Okay, then the last thing that I wanted to describe is substitutes for leadership, which are approaches that you use when the leadership model doesn't account for a situation where you really don't need leadership. So when would you not need leadership? Would it be because the procedures that you're doing are the same all the time and there are policy and procedures to guide you there? So you don't really need a leader standing there telling you every 4 seconds what you should be doing next. Could it also be that you would have a formal process by which you hire people and identify which people fit? Would you constantly need a leader there to review all your decisions or all those people, the people that you hire to make sure they're right or not right? So here are some of the substitutes for leadership. Substitutes for leadership specify what situation leader behaviors are neutralized or replaced by characteristics of the subordinate, the task, or the organization. So 3 things can replace them. For the subordinate, it may be to neutralize leader behavior include ability, experience, need for independence, professional orientation, and indifference towards organizational rewards. If the person that works for you is like that, then maybe they won't need leadership. Maybe they're a self-starter. Maybe they're someone who has a lot of intrinsic motivation. Task characteristics that may substitute for the leader include what I just mentioned: routineness, something that happens all the time. You have a policy and procedure for it. The availability of feedback. They get immediate feedback right away if something isn't right or if something is right. And then intrinsic satisfaction. You know, you're doing it correctly. You don't need someone to continue to tell you how to do it. Organizational characteristics that might substitute for leadership include the formalization, group cohesion, a rigid reward structure, and inflexibility. That means there's no wiggle room. There's no, inflexibility would be there's nowhere to go. This is how we have to do it. And that would be significant in medicine, be significant in semiconductors. I'm pointing to my cell phone, semiconductors and technology. You don't have any wiggle room. It would be significant in engineering, and the like my father and the satellites that he built was a rigid structure there. And group cohesion is group agreement, and so there you might not need leadership. Another related approach to leadership is charismatic leadership. Charisma is an individual characteristic of the leader. It's just an individual characteristic. It's a form of interpersonal attraction that somehow inspires us to support them and accept them as someone that is charismatic. They just feels right for us to follow them. There are 3 elements of charismatic leadership in organizations that we look at today. First one is that charismatic leaders must envision the future, set high expectations, and model behaviors consistent with those expectations. In other words, if they, want you to do something one way, then they need to be doing it that way so that you will follow them. They also must be able to energize people. And they may do it through personal excitement. They just may be really, really excitable, encouraging, happy, content with their life, and they make sure that you know it, but they're excited about the product or service that you have, and they want you to feel the same way. They also might just have a lot of personal confidence, and they might be very successful. So you naturally, if they say it worked for them, then it works. It's going to work for this company. Charismatic leaders also enable others by supporting them, empathizing with them, and expressing confidence. So they're very encouraging. And I know you've heard charismatic speakers before. 2 that came to my mind would be, one was Tony Robbins, who does motivational speaking, but he's kind of lost his touch now. And then the other one would be President Barack Obama. He was a very charismatic leader and speaker. The next type of leadership that I want to mention and review is transformational leadership. That goes beyond charisma, goes beyond ordinary expectations of leadership by most of us. They're able to transmit a sense of mission. They're able to encourage people to learn. They actually stimulate them to learn more by just being an encouraging type of person. And they're also very inspiring. They can inspire you to think differently, to look at things differently. I believe several of these successful companies that we've talked about during this lecture have those types of leaders because they know how to make people feel good about their job and about themselves. And that becomes an important and very important thing. And people will respond to that favorably. The last thing I want to cover is 3 emerging approaches to leadership, and they are strategic leadership, cross-cultural leadership, and ethical leadership. I don't think we have to delve deeply into them, but we have to acknowledge that they are something that is more looked at today, more desired today. Although I don't see them as emerging, I see them as here and have been here for a while. We just need to up the game a little bit as far as the number of these types of leaders. So strategic leaders are those who are who have the ability to understand complexity of the organization and the environment in which it works. Like this woman that I talked about earlier, Hunter Laux. She had a vision about sustainability, and she sees it as very important, and realizes that employees of today are focused on that. They think sustainability is important. So if they do, she thinks that companies should be able to say to them, look, we are a sustainable company. Patagonia is a company that's very focused on sustainability, not just for their company, but for other environmental causes. And people go to work for them because of that reason. So a leader that's able to do that, to lead change in an organization to achieve and maintain a superior alignment between the organization and its environment, not just the physical environment or the outside environment, just the world environment, that they are able to do that and look into the future to help the company go that direction. To be an effective strategic leader, a manager must have a thorough and complete understanding of its own organization, its history, its strengths, its weaknesses, and be able to understand the environment that it's in. Have what the book says, a firm grasp on that. And they want to work to improve both the current and the future of the company. Cross-cultural leadership is the second emerging type of leadership. It's based on those cross-cultural issues. Culture, in this context, culture is used as a broad concept to encompass both international differences and diversity-based differences. International differences, as I mentioned, I guess back in last week, all of us are global organizations now, so we have to be very keenly aware of the differences between different businesses in other countries and how they operate and what's acceptable and not acceptable. Same thing with the United States. So that's the international business. And diversity-based differences are also very important, as we all have been finding out in the last several years, and are working very hard to make changes to that. And then ethical leadership is an obvious need. We mentioned the corporate scandals of the past in the last week when we talked about the environment. We need to continue to do that and hire leaders who are looking at being more ethical and more prone to be ethical than not. Because corporate governance is becoming more and more important and more scrutinized. So it's, I wrote down here, leaders scrutinize more and more, and then I jotted down Facebook and Twitter. So part of the reason is everybody can see everything that happens, anything that you do, anything that you put in writing, and even some things that you haven't, but they can dig up. So it's very important that as a leader, you understand that scrutinization that comes with the package. So we have to be as ethical as we possibly, as ethical as we believe we are, and as much as we possibly can on an everyday basis. That's why good leaders have good people working for them that'll help them in those areas. Okay, so chapter 12 is communication and organizations. And I'm not going to lecture on that today, but I want you to understand that communication is an extremely important thing for managers, and one of the ways that they can become successful is to learn how to communicate well with their people. And probably the number one thing that you can do is listen before you speak. Listen first, speak later, and you'll have much better success with anyone that works for you or that you work with, especially in today's fast-paced environment. All right, let me see if there's anything else here that I wanted to cover. No. There's anything that's extremely jumping out at me here. Okay, so that's lecture part 2 for week 2. I'll see you in the forums this week and expect a lecture for next week also. And again, let me know if these are helpful or not helpful. If you prefer that I do it in a different format, I'd be happy to do so. Any feedback that you can provide, I'd appreciate. Okay, everyone, have a good week. Bye-bye.